Hello and welcome. I'm Ryan Galloway with Team Apptentive. Super excited to have you all here today and to be here with my co-host, Melanie Fox, to walk through some best practices on how to translate customer feedback into action. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. If you have anything to ask us about the topics covered today or about customer feedback in general, we'd love to see it. Please submit your questions in the open-ended Q&A field in Zoom. That is in the center bottom of your screen. If we run out of time to answer your questions, we'll be sure to follow up with you. Just be sure to put your name when you're logged into Zoom, and that will enable us to see your chat history at the conclusion of this webinar. We encourage you to ask questions or add to the discussion in the chat here. Be sure to select your message to go to attendees and panelists and not just panelists if you would like to share it with everyone. And then finally, we'll be sharing a link to this recording and slides later this week via a recap email, so stay tuned for that. With that, let's get started. All right, a little bit of quick introductions here. Again, my name's Ryan Galloway, and I'm a product marketer here at Apptentive. I've been here for about a year, but have been working in marketing roles in software and SaaS for about the last 10 years. And here at Apptentive, my work is usually involving go-to-market launch in close concert with our product team, including Melanie here. And I think the highlight of my role is being able to work closely with customers as well as our CSM team to document and capture some great customer stories. Definitely a highlight for me. On a personal note, I've got a 3- and a 5-year-old. Actually, my 5-year-old is I think he's 5.97 years old now. And the reason I know that is because he is now on a daily basis reminding me of just how many days remain until his birthday. So we may have a future mathematician in our family. We'll have to see. With that, Melanie.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Mel Fox, and I'm a product manager here at Apptentive. I started with Apptentive here in January, but previously I was actually a customer of Apptentive's. So that makes me really, really excited to be here talking to other either customers or potential customers or even just product managers who are interested in what we have to say here. I'm just very passionate about this topic that we have, and hopefully I can bring some relatable nuggets to all of you guys here. I also run my own business on the side. I also do aerial. I don't have any children, but I do have a dog child. His name is Pancake, and he's a corgi. And I have him specifically upstairs so that he doesn't bother us during this webinar. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me. We will go ahead and transition into some brands, and I'll throw it back to Ryan.
Yeah, so just a quick slide on Apptentive here. We're a mobile-first voice of feedback solution, and we work with many of the world's best brands to capture their customer feedback across their mobile journeys. So check us out, apptentive.com, or reach out to any of us, and we would love to chat with you. Quick agenda here. So we're going to go through and start off with a little bit of trivia. So get on the edge of your seats here, get the fingers warmed up. I think it's first come, first serve. I don't want to spoil anything. Melanie, you're going to go through all that. Then we're going to set the stage for why feedback matters. We're going to go through the different phases of feedback collection and some best practices there. And then we'll close with some key takeaways and reserve some time for Q&A. With that, I think, why don't we hand it off to our trivia master, Melanie, take it away.
Okay, we love to kick off our webinars here with a little bit of trivia. There will be prizes, so get your game faces on. Try not to Google, though I know you guys are all expert Googlers at this point. And for those of you who know me at all, I mentioned I run a small business. It is around working out and drinking beer, and I also just love dogs and beer. So we've got a little bit of beer-themed questions for us today. So everyone at the ready in the chat here, we're going to go to question number 1. Question number 1 is, how many gallons of beer does the world consume per year? Closest estimate wins. I like to play Price is Right rules, but our chat moderator, Madeline, is actually going to be picking our winner here. Ooh, we got 4 billion, 5 billion. We've got 10 billion. Someone said not enough, which honestly, debatable, but also not wrong. 3 billion. All right, keep going. 850 million, 750 million, billions. Oh man, we've got a lot of people coming in here. All right, get your last minute guesses, and I won't keep you on the edges of your seat here for too much longer. The answer, you ready? Ooh, we got 25 billion. I think that actually might be our closest. The answer is 50 billion gallons of beer every year. I'm not saying my side business is in the right space, but I do think that beer has some legs to it here. Great job guessing. We'll head into question number 2, which is what country drinks the most beer per capita? So we're still talking at a worldly basis here. Let's get some. Germany obviously feels like I feel like that feels like an obvious guess. Czech Republic, Ireland. Ooh, I'm seeing, will it enter? We have Adam coming in hot with Poland, which is the correct answer. Poland. The Polish folks really interested in beer. That was fun for me. I hope that was fun for you guys as well. Just wanted to get you guys a little bit familiar chatting in there. Again, we would love to hear you in the chat throughout this presentation. But I'm going to actually go ahead and throw it back over to Ryan to get us into the good stuff, the stuff we're here for, which is unfortunately not talking about beer the entire time. So
yeah, sadly. Thanks, Melanie. So why are we all here today? I think this slide kind of encapsulates it, right? So despite the fact that I think everyone on the call probably understands the intrinsic value of customer feedback, the truth is that all too often customer feedback is requested, is received, but never acted upon. And this Gartner quote here, showing that only 10% of customers use feedback to improve. This is an older stat. I think, I've seen new research that indicates this is a little bit higher now, but even so, there's still also kind of a perception gap among customers, right? So the second quote here kind of captures that, right? 79% of customers are feeling ignored. And so, even if we act on feedback, if we don't respond to customers, that perception can still linger there. And unfortunately, it's kind of normal for customers to never hear back on the feedback that they give. So the net result of that kind of results in survey fatigue. Ultimately, they don't have a great incentive to provide feedback in the future if they know that it's going to go into a black hole. So that's why we feel like taking action on feedback is so critical. It combats that gap and that perception. And it's also a really good way to avoid customer churn, right? Salesforce research indicates that I think about 78% of customers are willing to forgive a company for a mistake if they respond strongly with a good follow-up. So again, it just speaks to the power of acting and responding. So why aren't we seeing everyone doing it today? Again, the benefits of feedback are clear. So why aren't we taking action 100% of the time? And I think there's a few factors at play here. Number one, it can be challenging to get the right feedback, that is feedback that you can take action on from the right people. And I kind of think about that with my statistics mindset of being, a valid cross-section of your customer base at the right time. And we oftentimes think about that in terms of surfacing interactions at a time when it's going to be least disruptive to whatever you're trying to get your customers to accomplish in your product or your app or your experience. So doing all three of those things at one time can be a challenge, right? As product team members, we know the second one hits home right here, right? Just the volume of feedback that we can get, it can be overwhelming, right? So how do you sift through it? How do you prioritize it? Melanie's going to share some great ideas around that here shortly. And then third, and this is kind of especially relevant as we talk about closing the loop with customers, it's always great to provide that response as personalized as you can get it. But depending on the level of customer data you have at your fingertips, the tools you're using, the skill set on your team, that can all make personalization a challenge. So the result is, at the end of the day, most companies, if they're even if they're acting on the feedback received, what we see is, they usually fall into one of these three buckets. So they fail to follow up at all, or maybe they'll just prioritize, right? They've got limited, we all have limited resources. So if you can only close the loop with some of your customers, you're probably going to go to the vocal minority or your VIP customers, maybe those that contribute the most revenue to your product. So you have to prioritize. Or third, neglect personalization altogether, right? And just sort of broadcast the latest feature update. I think we've all seen a million of those, right? So the issue here with these ways of responding or not responding is that it just reinforces that perception among customers that their feedback isn't being put to use. So now that we've set a little bit of the context and the challenge, let's talk about how we're seeing brands utilizing feedback today. Number one, winning back unhappy customers. So this is churn reduction, right? When you understand customer sentiment on an individual level, you can quickly survey those whose sentiment might be negative, right? To follow up with deeper questions to understand what was the friction point in their experience that led them to have that feeling, right? Number two, build loyalty. Offering loyalty programs to the right segment of your audience, inviting them to refer friends, or just closing the loop on their latest feature request are all really good proven ways to build loyalty. Capturing or converting happy customers into marketers. I like to call this amplifying your biggest fans, but really it's about inviting those who have expressed positive sentiment to rate and review your product at every opportunity, right? Or as one of our customers recently did, actually ask their biggest fans to star in a marketing video. This really happened and it was a wild success. Number four, inform marketing campaigns. So we all know that it's much easier to come up with personalized and higher converting offers when you know more about your customer. And then lastly here, and this is really going to be the focus of this webinar, building better products and experiences with the customer feedback that you get. So with that, I can't think of a better time to kick it over to Melanie.
Amazing. So I'm going to move into showing you what isn't necessarily a revolutionary graphic, right? But it's extremely important to reference this process because we're going to be dissecting this along the way here. So really taking a look at these four components and noting that this is a loop is going to allow us to dig into how to create a true customer feedback strategy, allowing you to take really, really meaningful action on that feedback that you receive. So with that being said, we are going to start with a focus on capturing feedback. So whether you're B2C or B2B or B2B2C, whatever it may be, capturing good feedback is a crucial first step into creating this exceptional customer experience that we're all after. So let's just dig in a little bit deeper. We talked about this very, very quickly at the beginning here, but it starts about getting the right feedback from the right people at the right time, right? So first, gathering the right feedback starts with setting a goal and a hypothesis. What's the purpose of your survey? What do you hope to understand about your target market through this effort? Are you looking for validation or are you looking for direction? And how do you even write a good survey question? We'll get into kind of best survey practices later in the presentation, but there are so many questions to ask yourself before you even launch a survey, including the second category here, which is who should you be targeting? So if you're asking all the right questions, but to the wrong audience, your feedback will be crap. I mean, it's just not going to be good. So you want to make sure you're intentionally targeting those customers. If you have user personas, this is a great time for those to shine. If you don't know which customers of yours are which persona, you can use a survey for that. That's like a great time to try to identify who in your audience is what particular persona type. And you'll continue to refine your audience as you mature in this process. It's not going to be an overnight thing. And you know what? Hey, like some people might not want to take your survey and that's okay. But making sure that you have the option to do so is really what we're after here. We want to be able to give a voice to every single customer. Whether they want to use that or not is on them, but we want to make sure we're offering that up. And finally, presenting a survey during a crucial moment in your user experience will probably throw people off. I actually just had an experience where I was going to schedule an HVAC appointment as I'm like sweating in my house because my HVAC went out. And I'm on the website filling out a form to try and get someone to come to me. And I get a survey that pops up mid-form that's like, hey, how do you like our website? And I was like, I don't like it right now. I'm going to be honest with you. This is poor timing as I'm trying to go through a crucial step to receive HVAC service in the middle of the summer in Charlotte, North Carolina. So that component there is so, so important. And I think people realizing that all of these things come together is really, really what we're after here, right? It all sounds good in theory, I think, right? Hopefully this sounds good in theory. Please, someone in the chat, validate this. But there are things we might be thinking, right? In theory, this is good, but like, what if no one's responding to my surveys? Also, just as a heads up, we have a very strong Schitt's Creek GIF game during this presentation. So I hope you guys are vibing with David and Moira and Alexis as much as we are. But circling back, we crafted this amazing survey, right? We put it in a spot that's not interrupting the user experience. We're super intentional about who we're targeting to, but what if no one's answering? I feel like we've all been there, especially as we've been like exploring the best ways to gather that right customer feedback. Anyone else? If anyone else has been there, again, throw this in the chat because I want to just make sure I'm not alone here. I will say too, it takes just a little bit of trial and error to find that sweet spot of not interrupting folks, and also like getting the right amount of reach to get your audience participating and having it be statistically valid. I do want to hit on one important topic here, and Ryan mentioned it earlier. That's survey fatigue, right? So while this might not always be the reason folks aren't taking your surveys, we can go down that rabbit hole for a long time around reasons people aren't going to be taking surveys. But one thing that we hear time and time again from our customers is like, I'm worried that I'm over surveying my audience. Like, I don't want to create survey fatigue. And that's fair. We hear that. Launching a survey every other day is a great way to get your audience to be irritated with you, unless I guess you're like a market research app and people expect that. But I do want to offer just some quick tips and tricks to make sure you're not wearing out your audience, but you're still getting that right quantity of feedback and results that provide quality feedback for your team, right? So first things first, have a plan. I like to sit down at the beginning of each month and plan out the surveys as if I'm working a content calendar like a marketer, right? If it's in the calendar, it's going to happen. And it'll allow you to track how many surveys you're actually running or putting out into your audience, especially if you have a large team and you have a little bit of crossover there. It sounds like a no-brainer, but you'd be shocked at how many people are super, super reactive with their feedback strategy versus proactive when it comes to gathering the right customer feedback. So plan it out. If you're anything like me and if it gets put on the calendar, it's going to get done, right? So great for tracking. Having a plan is super important. No one's going to be surprised about that. If they know me, I'm like super organizational based. So step one, be organized. Step two, this is going to be a crowd favorite from any Apptentive customers on the line here. Master the micro survey. We always recommend keeping it simple, especially out of the gate. Your questions should be short and clear. We recommend shorter surveys that can then be retargeted to those who answered the question in a specific way, again, with the goal there of reducing that survey fatigue. If it's not relevant to me, why would I keep taking this survey, right? We can give a really simple example here. Let's say at the end of a mobile purchase, you want to know how you did as the provider of that service. So you ask a simple question. Hey, did you enjoy your checkout experience? Yes or no? And then you can follow it up with a second question that says, what could we do better in the future? And if there's a whole bunch of your customers that say they had an issue submitting their billing information as an example, your team will probably want to dig into that more, right? But instead of pulsing your entire audience on like, hey, are you having billing issues? Like bringing up an issue, just target those folks who directly gave you that feedback and say, hey, we hear you. What can we do better? And then that's when you can offer a more complex survey. That might be where you say, okay, a micro survey isn't appropriate here. I might need to ask 5 questions to really drill into what's happening here. But you know that those people care because they gave you feedback out of the first place, right? So that's a super simple example, but the data you can collect with just 1 or 2 questions is really, really powerful. And again, it allows you to be much more intentional with how you target your feedback efforts in the future. Y'all still hanging with me? All right, cool. So next on the list here is analyze. So you wrote a kick-ass survey or 2 or 3, and now you're getting data. amazing. This is a great moment for us, right? We all want that data. But then what? As we mentioned earlier, how do you sift through all of that customer feedback data? As David says here, it's too much. It can be really overwhelming. This is actually one of my biggest gripes as a product manager who managed a very, very, very large mobile application with tons and tons and tons of data coming in at all times. I like to think that having a ton of data is a good problem to have, but because it can be overwhelming, you really have to be strategic about how you sift through, how you categorize, and how you prioritize things, and just figure out how you make sense of everything. Personally, I recommend the crawl, walk, run approach. So start small, one bite at a time here. So when I first became an Apptentive customer and began collecting what felt like a wild amount of data compared to what I had before, I just put blinders on and stayed hyper focused on App Store and Google Play Store reviews to identify trends there. It was my main focus because the quantity of data that I was coming in, it was unrealistic for me as the PM to also become a data analyst. But once I was able to get comfortable with a cadence of checking reviews and getting a process in for documenting my findings, then I was really able to level up my research and start that plan or that strategy that I had mentioned earlier, right? Starting to plan out actual direct feedback surveys around topics that I was making decisions as a product manager. But this is also kind of where things start to get tricky, because now you're adding in additional elements of gathering customer feedback, right? When you have tons of customer feedback coming in, categorizing that becomes very, very important. And fortunately for me, again, harping on this as a customer, but Apptentive insights and the dashboards there did a ton for me, right? I was able to tag comments coming in to highlight what specific feature they were referencing so that I could follow up with them later. I was able to sort feedback by sentiment to understand what features have really, really good sentiment versus what features are getting really negative sentiment, and so on and so forth. I mean, there was a lot we could do to categorize there. And this is the part of the process. Whoop, we lost our share. It's fine, I'll keep going. This is the part of the process that gets continually more complex as you introduce more and more feedback mechanisms into the mix, which is why that lives in the run stage here. So crawl, walk, run, right? No one's process looks the same, but I recommend taking it step by step instead of just trying to do everything at once. I think that's definitely the approach to go through. And once you get to run stage, it might be a lot, but it's great because that means you can start making really, really, really big and intentional moves, which brings us to our next category. Taking action. I think that's actually why we're all here, to talk about the action phase here. So we talked about capturing feedback, how to begin analyzing that feedback, and now taking action. So if you're lucky, you've identified 70, 100, however many things to add into your backlog, but they need to be prioritized, right? How the heck do you do that, right? This is one of my biggest my biggest feats initially as a product manager was figuring out how to actually prioritize things effectively. So in my opinion, creating a prioritization matrix helps this so much, especially if you're okay, I have 100 things that just came in and everyone's asking for different things and I don't know where to start. Be analytical about it. So I take into consideration things like level of effort, number of customers this particular feature or functionality will impact, competitive necessity, is this just table stakes, and revenue opportunity, right? At a high level, those are 4 core things that I always look at and evaluate against one another. And then it'll naturally kind of prioritize itself. Yes, you obviously have to take into consideration your larger business strategy as well. But when it comes to receiving feedback that you're specifically trying to either introduce new features or functionality on, this is a great way to do that. So once you've narrowed it down and your team has, let's say, top 5 most important things to focus on, it's time to grab one and just start developing. This isn't rocket science. Go through your usual software development process, and know that you'll have space to iterate and pulse your audience once you've released something. I always suggest adding a survey into the mix here, either before you release or right after, or both. This can give you some extremely insightful feedback that can either drive, maybe it'll find a bug for you before you release to the masses, but also it'll drive future iterations for you. So, once you get MVP out or your first release out, getting that feedback immediately and being able to apply it, it's like, boom, great, amazing. Our customers now see that we're listening to them, and we will continue to improve because we've gotten that feedback. And that's like such a blessing to product managers or development teams to be able to get immediate feedback. What a time. All right. So I'm actually going to jump into a quick example from when I was an Apptentive customer. So I worked for an HVAC company where I managed our smart home HVAC mobile apps. I like to joke that my team was the redheaded stepchild in this organization because when I took on the role, I was walking into two 2.7-star mobile applications. There was no formal marketing strategy for getting app reviews or just in general. There was no customer feedback strategy. And the only feedback loop we had was through our support channels, which we had an incredible support team, very technically savvy folks helping. But that was the only way we were closing the feedback loop. So I entered this role and I said, challenge accepted. We launched an initiative that we called Project 5-Star. And with this initiative, we implemented the Apptentive SDKs to focus on obtaining ratings and reviews. That was step one. It was like, please, right now, as Ryan mentioned earlier, like we're hearing from the vocal minority, and it was a lot of disgruntled customers. But I wanted to hear from everyone. I wanted to know what people really thought of this app before we decided how we were going to build our roadmap moving forward. And it worked. So after bringing our ratings up to 4.8 stars from 2.7 for both apps, and here's the important part, maintaining that rating over years, we then were able to begin dabbling a little bit more in customer feedback. So we began launching more intentional surveys to understand how we can improve the user experience. We began really hyper-focusing on specific features that were outlined. And so in this little story that I have for you, I will talk about one particular feature that continued to be a major pain point for our customers. And we'll jump right in there. So after hearing time and time again through surveys, through App Store reviews, through our support channels, it was really apparent that we had one problematic feature that our user base was just really having a tough time using. And so what did we do first, right? We decided to probe deeper on the topic. What specifically was the biggest pain point? Where are people getting stuck? And we used a combination of existing data, so data that had come in from our ratings and reviews, from our support channels, along with new surveys that we were probing on and digging into better, as well as usability testing to really address the core pain points. So then we were able to create a UX plan where we introduced a brand new experience, more usability testing, and pretty much the works went into this one. I mean, we really dissected this because we really wanted to get it right. We knew how much frustration had gone into this on the customer side, and this was a pain point that we wanted to solve not only for our current customers, but for all future customers as well. And eventually MVP was created and released. So if you notice any pattern here, we captured the right feedback. We analyzed multiple sources of data. We acted by creating a brand new user experience. And now it's time to close the feedback loop. So as a product manager now, I would be stoked because Apptentive has new functionality where you can use response targeting, which means I could get every single person who ever said that they hated this feature and let them know, hey, we heard you. Previously, we were just leveraging notes and sending out notes that was like, hey, this new feature is available. And it was kind of that like blanket message. Now it feels like it would be a no-brainer to just use response targeting here and be like, thank you so much for all of your feedback. Like, I swear we heard you, and this is what we've had done to solve your problems. And by the way, if you have any more feedback about it, please give it to us, because we are going to continuously iterate and we're going to keep listening to you. All right. Did you guys think that I could tell that entire story with just Schitt's Creek gifts like along the way? Because I feel like we did a really good job there. Not to pat Madeline on the back. She found all the Schitt's Creek gifts. Okay. So I'm actually going to touch on closing the feedback loop in a little bit more depth as the closing to my section. And I know we just talked about this lightly, but closing the loop is probably at this point in the game one of the most crucial steps in the process that still gets overlooked. It's just so important to let your customers know that you're listening to them and that you're acting based on what you are hearing. Our customers want to know that we're human just as much as we want to know that our customers are human. So you can do this in two ways. One, the more traditional way of shouting everything to everyone. If we have any Bo Burnham fans in the audience, all I think of is, can I interest you in everything all of the time? Anyone else? Okay, great. So that's what I think of when we think of like blanket communications, is like, this is going to everyone, everyone's going to see it, great. Or the other option is to target your messaging to make it feel more personable. So you can see in the examples here, this is like the most basic example I could have put up on here, but like, new feature now available, great, check this out, you'll love it, versus, we heard you, thank you so much for your feedback, because of you, we just launched this new feature, enjoy. And even you can see the calls to action here vary, like, let me learn more versus let me try it out because I've asked for it. Honestly, I recommend you do both. Target your audience who really kicked and screamed for these updates first, and then follow up with a more generic message to your audience once you've heard even more feedback from that audience you know cared about it, right? So it almost feels like it's a dual effort here, and it's great that you can like hyper target, but eventually you'll probably want to tell your audience about the cool new thing you just launched for everyone. So that was a lot. I do have a note here too that says continue to ask for feedback to keep the loop going. That graphic I showed you is a loop that is continuous for a reason, right? You're gonna continuously iterate, you're gonna continuously develop, and you'll never likely be perfect to everyone for everything all of the time. So with that being said, I'm actually gonna throw it over to Ryan to tell one more customer story before we move into our recap, so I can breathe for a hot second. So throwing it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah, so in this WeatherBug story, you're going to notice hopefully quite a few similarities with Melanie's HVAC story. The WeatherBug product team initially had two goals. So first, their product team wanted to, they were going through their reviews manually, and they were noticing a lot of complaints around slow to load issues, but they wanted to get a better understanding of just how widespread that issue was across their user base. And then secondly, they wanted to boost their organic installs, and they knew that one critical way of doing that is to improve ratings and reviews. And WeatherBug has a lot of users, 12 million active users, right? And they knew that many of their happy customers were not getting that same opportunity to review that their some other customers were. So making sure that they were that those most satisfied with their WeatherBug experience were front and center was really key to them. And using the Apptentive Love Dialog, they were able to quickly target customer sentiment, customers by sentiment, and then within the first month saw a tenfold increase in their ratings and review volume. And with that increased review volume, as well as some Apptentive surveys they launched within their app, they were able to quickly pinpoint the issues behind their slow to load complaints and address that in an update. But still to this day, they are surveying customers with very pointed questions around app performance and continuing to track this metric moving forward with every new update that they release, and discussing this metric in their regular product team meetings. So great story from WeatherBug, and just a good example of putting customer feedback into action. All right, yeah, we covered a lot today. Melanie covered a lot. So 3 takeaways. maybe 3.5, 4 takeaways here. Number one, taking action on feedback all starts with capturing the right feedback up front, right? So sound survey design principles we covered, targeting your audience very intentionally, presenting feedback interactions at the right time within their customer journey, all great things to remember. Number two, analyzing feedback, but don't fall into analysis paralysis, right? Kind of the crawl, walk, run, as Melanie covered. Start with one goal, one hypothesis, test it with a survey, test it with an interaction, and then build from there. Number three, take action by prioritizing your backlog. Melanie had some great tips on that. And then 4 here, don't forget to close those feedback loops. It's one of the best ways to show customers what we're accomplishing as a product team. And it also builds loyalty, and it fights that perception that their feedback isn't driving meaningful change. All right. With that, thanks for hanging in there. We hope you found the content of this webinar to be valuable. If you're interested in learning more about our central theme here, which was informing and prioritizing your product roadmap, I just wanted to call out this follow-up webinar that Melanie will again be co-hosting. Kudos to you, Melanie, for the back-to-back webinars, along with Lou, another one of our product managers, on August 3rd. And this is going to be a little bit more of a deeper dive into tactical concepts and the Apptentive product in this workflow. So the link is in the chat here. Feel free to jump in there and register now. And with that, I think I'll transition to some Q&A. So as a reminder, we'll be sharing today's recordings and slides later in the week in case there is anything you want to circle back on. And now let's get to some listener questions. All right, we've got a lot. So starting with one of the questions I saw we got in the chat earlier was, are we going to talk about incentives for filling surveys? What works best? And I've got some thoughts here. Melanie, I'll kick it over to you. But I know generally what we think, I think as a company, is we've seen time and time again that customers want to provide feedback, right? They want to be heard. And before considering an incentive, we'd probably recommend, what are the goals of the survey, making sure we work through that. Are we surveying the right people? And then, again, kind of a lot of the targeting principles we covered today, are we reaching out to them at the right time? And we really feel like with that combination, we're going to get really good response rates. Melanie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I feel like if you have a B2C audience, getting feedback can be a relatively simple process. But if you have either a niche audience or even if you're B2B, it can be really tough to get that quantity of feedback that you're seeking. I always advocate for creating relationships with your customers so that whenever you have a need or a request or an ask or just trying to validate something, you can have a little bit more of a personal connection there. And it can be more of usability testing or an interview versus a strict survey. But I would say I've seen incentives work really well. We're just in this area of everyone is getting swamped all the time with requests and asks. And even if you offer an incentive, is that the person that you want that data from or you want that feedback from? So I would advocate, if you're just not getting the quantity, is trying to have more of those one-on-one relationships. And yeah, it's a little bit more time consuming, but you can learn so much in a one-on-one session with one of your customers who deeply cares about something versus, fishing or trying to pull teeth to get people to take a survey of yours. So yeah, I feel that pain point from the B2B side when I've been in the B2B world, and it can be pretty painful. Did that answer, hopefully, whoever had asked the question?
Yeah, hopefully we'll see the thumbs up in the chat here.
Yeah, okay.
Great. Yes, thanks you. All right, one more question. How do we target future surveys based on survey responses? Can that be done through segments, or do I need to manually load the user IDs into surveys? I know, Melanie, you hit on interaction response targeting a little bit here. Do we want to dive in just a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so this is one of our best kept secrets and a newer feature that we recently launched, which is response targeting. And we actually have this built in, like the specific thing that you're asking for here is like, how do I target future surveys based on survey responses? You can literally hit new survey, and in your targeting, you can hit survey based on this specific survey, the other one that they took, and that answer to the question. So we've tried to make that as simple as possible so you can really, really hone in. And same thing with like open responses as well. So like if they said kiosk, I like to use kiosk as an example. Like someone was like really frustrated with the kiosk, like, okay, I want to know why they were frustrated with this kiosk in our location, and let me go in and target based on that. So you don't have to do anything like ultra complex from like a segmentation perspective. It'll kind of auto segment for you, which is really nice.
Thank you. All right. One more question for you, Melanie. Could you please share the frameworks you use to prioritize feedback? You mentioned briefly the matrix, but would be super helpful to double click on that.
The matrix, yes. So prioritization is a really in-depth topic for product managers, especially when you have tons and tons and tons of requests and a really big vision and things you're syncing towards. And so I work as a product person, you're working cross-functionally, right? Pretty dramatically. And I like to make things analytical, as I mentioned, so that folks maybe can understand why things are prioritized the way they are and all agree upon what those components of the matrix are. So we actually have like a Jira discovery project that we use within Apptentive specifically. I've done this just in a spreadsheet before with like, you know, some knowledge added into it. But how we do this is we look at things like customer feedback. So like quantity of requests that we've gotten for something. So if we had one customer request it, that'll get a lower ranking versus if we had 100 customers request that. So we're ranking based on a scale, and it's a different scale for each set of criteria. So let's say for customer feedback, we want to say this should be weighed pretty heavily. So we're going to weigh this against our other sets of criteria so that we make sure that if 200 customers have asked for this, we're going to deliver on it. We also look at things like level of effort, which is really important. If something is like a sprint's worth of work versus 6 months of work, we have opportunities to prioritize some of those smaller wins in our backlog versus focusing on something that might not be like available or obtainable for us to hit in that next quarter. We also look at things like revenue, which is important for a business. We look at things like upsell or reducing churn, as we mentioned earlier. We also look at things like pain relief, like will this help the operations of our team or our customer support team in any form or fashion? Will this like reduce extra work for us? So it's not just like features and functionality requests, like tech debt also gets kind of stacked in this list because you have to prioritize that along with anything else as well. And yeah, we also look at things like competitive necessity, like, hey, if all of the other competitors are doing this and it's expected, like it should probably get boosted up in the priority matrix. So yeah, I'm totally happy to share a spreadsheet or a matrix or whatever you guys will be helpful for you. Even if it's just a basic matrix for you guys to get started. It's super helpful to like really just be like, I've been very analytical and intentional about this. And now I can like stack rank things without feeling like I'm making the wrong decision. Of course, always rank it against the rest of your business priorities and the direction your business is going. But for me, I found that this is like a really, really strong way to do that. Sorry if that was super geeky. I really like the priority matrix. So cool.
That was great. And yeah, it sounds like also our follow-up webinar is going to dive into some of those concepts in more detail too. So awesome. Thank you.
I'll geek out even more. You guys get right. I'll bring examples next time. How about that?
One more question. I'm a UX researcher and would love to include Apptentive data into our Dovetail Insights database. Is there functionality to auto export the data? So I know we have a webhook and I know we've got a metrics API, but Melanie, you might want to.
So this is reach out to your CSM on this one. We are making a lot of really strong updates to our API right now. So there will likely be a solution here for you, but it's going to vary by customer. So reach out to either myself, or if you have a CSM that you work with, or both of us. And we can talk more about solutions there. But yeah, we have customers taking our data and doing so much cool stuff with it based on all the different hooks and the way they're passing data around. Especially if you have other disparate data sources that maybe aren't living all in Apptentive right now, it's great to go and try and figure out how I can plug this into the rest of the stuff. And then again, you can geek out. Dashboards.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think with that, we're going to wrap. Thanks, everyone, for all of your wonderful questions. If we didn't get to your specific question, as long as we've got your name, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly. If more questions arise, there's going to be that follow-up email later this week. So please feel free to reply. It'll come back to us, and we can close the loop with you. But thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, all.